Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into something I saw online that's pretty interesting. It's this idea that all this increased solar activity we keep hearing about could be connected to some really big changes happening in the world today. We've got some interesting sources to go through, like articles on the science behind solar activity and how it could even be affecting human behavior. Then there's some old prophecies too that seem strangely relevant to what's going on now. Plus, I found this article and book called The Tide Has Turned by a guy named Paul Ray that really grabbed my attention.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating here. It's this whole idea that the sun might be shaping our lives and even the way humans are evolving much more than we even realize. We all know it's important for life on Earth, light, warmth, all that. But what if it goes way beyond the physical stuff?
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. So what are we talking about exactly? It's like, is the sun secretly calling the shots in our
Yeah.
lives?
Well, maybe not controlling us exactly, but it could be influencing us in ways we don't expect. Some researchers are saying that all this increased solar activity, especially during those times when we have intense solar flares and geomagnetic storms, they think that can actually impact Earth's electromagnetic field. And then in turn, that seems to affect human biofields.
Wait a minute now,
Which,
biofields,
yeah,
what are those?
think of it like those invisible energy fields that everyone has around them.
Oh, so like an aura.
Exactly. And these biofields, well, there's this research from the HeartMath Institute. They're saying that they seem to be super sensitive to changes in the Earth's magnetic field, which, as we said, can get all messed up by solar activity. They've actually found that there's a direct link between those geomagnetic storms and changes in our biofields,
Yeah.
which can then affect all kinds of things, like our emotions, how we sleep, even our intuition.
So you mean to tell me
Mm-hmm.
that a solar flare happening millions of miles away
Mm.
could be messing with how I feel right now?
That's what the research seems to show. Pretty mind-blowing, right? The HeartMath Institute has noticed something pretty interesting. When there's a lot of solar activity going on, people say they're more emotional, their dreams get more vivid, and they even feel like their intuition is stronger.
That's wild.
Hmm.
But how does any of that tie into all this talk about a global awakening that everyone keeps talking about? Is there actually any science behind that? Or is it just new age stuff?
Well, I know that global awakening sounds kind of vague, but some researchers think that this increased solar activity could actually be acting as a catalyst for a change in human consciousness. It's like the sun is sending out all this energy that's shaking things up both physically and energetically.
Okay, now I'm starting to see how this all connects. But what about those ancient cultures who saw solar events as like big warning signs? Are we just seeing the same thing play out again?
That's a great question. And that brings us to this idea of solar cycles. The sun goes through this 11-year cycle, where it goes from a quiet phase called solar minimum to this super active phase called solar maximum. During solar maximum, we see tons of sunspots, solar flares, and these things called coronal mass ejections, or CMEs.
CMEs, what are those exactly?
CMEs are basically giant bursts of solar energy and plasma. They can erupt from the sun and blast through space. And if one happens to be aimed right at Earth, it can actually screw up our power grids, satellites, and all our communication systems. So they're not just pretty lights in the sky. They can really affect our technology.
Wow, so does that mean that all those end-of-the-world preppers who are freaking out about solar storms, are they actually right to be worried?
Well, it's not impossible. But it's good to remember that scientists are mostly focused on the effects of CMEs on our physical world. But there are some researchers out there who are looking into how these geomagnetic storms could actually be affecting human behavior and consciousness on a larger scale.
Now, that's fascinating. So we've got some science to back up these ideas about how the sun is influencing us. But what about the spiritual side of this whole thing?
That's where Paul Ray's work comes in, his article and book, The Tide Has Turned. They approach it from a more spiritual angle, suggesting that all this crazy solar activity is like a wake-up call from the universe, a push for humanity to evolve and reach a higher level of consciousness.
That's a pretty big idea. So where does science end and spirituality begin in all this?
It's really interesting because Ray specifically talks about the Schumann resonance, which is a frequency tied to human brainwaves. And studies have shown that this frequency actually spikes during solar storms.
Hold on. So the sun is messing with our brains.
Well, maybe not messing with them exactly, but the research does seem to show a link. Between solar activity and these fluctuations in the Schumann resonance, it's often called Earth's heartbeat, because it's this electromagnetic frequency that surrounds our planet. And some researchers think that these fluctuations could actually be affecting our consciousness in ways we're just starting to understand.
This is getting really interesting.
Hmm.
We've got ancient cultures worshiping the sun, modern science studying how it messes with our biofields and brain waves, and spiritual thinkers talking about a global awakening. It seems like there's way more to the sun than we ever thought.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore more in this deep dive. We'll look at how all these different perspectives, the scientific, the ancient, and the spiritual, they all point to this idea that the sun could be playing a huge role in humanity's transformation.
Wow, this is mind-blowing already. I can't wait to get into this more. But before we go any further, can you tell us a bit more about Paul Ray's book, The Tide Has Turned? Sounds like it could be a good resource for our listeners who want to explore all this stuff too.
Absolutely. The Tide Has Turned is this super interesting look at how cosmic forces, especially the sun's energy, could be influencing how humans evolve. It mixes science, spirituality, and ancient wisdom, and it really makes you rethink your relationship with the cosmos.
That sounds like a must-read for anyone who's as intrigued by all this as we are. Where can our listeners find it?
You can get The Tide Has Turned on the Aligned Harmony website. It's www.alignedharmony.com. They've got a ton of other awesome resources on all this stuff, too.
Perfect. We'll make sure to put a link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Now let's get back to this deep dive. You mentioned that Ray thinks humanity is on the edge of a brand new era of consciousness.
Yep.
What exactly does he mean by that? And how does all this solar activity fit into that picture?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. But before we jump into that, let's take a step back and look at some specific examples of how the solar activity could be affecting us every day.
Okay, that sounds good.
Mhm.
Let's do it. What kind of things are we talking about?
Well, one thing researchers have been looking into is if there's a link between solar activity and all those crazy weather events we've been having. It's complicated stuff, but some studies are saying that those intense bursts of energy from the sun, like those CMEs we talked about, they could actually be messing with our atmosphere here on Earth and causing things like hurricanes, floods, and even droughts.
Wait, so you're saying the sun could be playing a part in all those crazy weather patterns we've been seeing?
Some scientists think it's possible. They believe that those geomagnetic storms can disrupt the Earth's atmosphere, and that could lead to more extreme and unpredictable weather.
So it's not just our technology that's at risk from solar storms. Our whole planet could be feeling the effects.
That's right, and it might not just be the physical environment either. Some researchers think that solar activity could even be affecting human behavior as a whole.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What kind of connections are we talking about?
Well, remember how we talked about the HeartMath Institute's research on biofields and how they seem to be sensitive to geomagnetic storms? Well, some sociologists and psychologists are saying that maybe these changes in our biofields could be linked to shifts in our moods and behaviors on a bigger scale.
So you mean like solar activity could be making people more irritable or more likely to fight?
It's just a theory some researchers are exploring. But they've seen that peaks in solar activity seem to happen at the same time as periods of social unrest, political upheaval, even problems in the economy.
Wow, that's a pretty big claim. So you're saying a solar flare could set off a revolution?
Remember, we're talking about things that seem to happen at the same time. Not necessarily that one causes the other directly. But it's pretty fascinating to think about how these cosmic events could be interacting with our energy individually and collectively, and how those subtle influences could be playing a role in shaping history.
This is blowing my mind. So we've got possible links to crazy weather, social unrest, even the stock market going haywire. Where does this whole global awakening idea fit into all of this?
That's what makes Paul Ray's perspective so interesting. He sees all these things happening together. The solar activity, the environmental changes, the social upheaval, as all part of this bigger transformation that humanity is going through.
Okay, I see what you mean. So how does Ray actually tie solar activity to this idea of a global awakening?
He thinks that all this increased solar activity is acting like a catalyst, like a cosmic jumpstart that's pushing us to evolve to a higher level of consciousness. He says those solar flares and geomagnetic storms are basically showering us with high-frequency energy. And that can help us break free from old patterns, limiting beliefs, and outdated ways of thinking.
So it's like the sun is giving us a cosmic upgrade.
You could say that. Ray thinks that this flood of solar energy is helping to wake up our hidden potential, make our intuition stronger, and expand our awareness. He sees it as a natural part of how humans evolve, something that's been happening for a really long time. But it's being sped up by the solar cycle we're in right now.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. But if all this is happening on such a subtle energy level, how do we even know if it's real? How can we tell if these cosmic forces are actually affecting us?
That's a great question. And it's something that each of us has to figure out for ourselves. Ray suggests paying attention to your intuition, to those little nudges and inner voices that are guiding you towards a new way of being. He also says it's really important to connect with nature, be mindful of your energy, and to practice things that help you stay grounded and centered during these crazy times of transformation.
So basically, we need to tune in and listen to what our bodies, minds, and our intuition are telling us.
Exactly, and to be open to the idea that something bigger is happening, even if our rational minds can't fully wrap around it.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit it's a little overwhelming too. It's like we're being asked to rethink everything we thought we knew about ourselves, our planet, and where we fit in the whole universe.
I get it. It's a lot to take in, but I think that's what makes it so amazing. It's an invitation to step outside of our comfort zones, to open up our minds, and to embrace the mystery and wonder of it all.
I love that embracing the mysteries. Feels like we're just scratching the surface of this topic. So where do we go from here? What's the next step for our listeners who want to dive deeper into these ideas?
Well, as we mentioned before, Paul Ray's book, The Tide Has Turned, is a fantastic resource for really digging into these concepts. It's a really thought-provoking book that gives you a unique mix of science, spirituality, and practical advice for how to handle these changing times.
I'm definitely adding that to my reading list. Where can our listeners find it again?
It's on the Aligned Harmony website, www.alignedharmony.com.
Okay, so we've talked about how the sun might be messing with our weather, our society, and even our consciousness. But what about our personal lives? How does all this global awakening stuff actually affect us as individuals?
That's where things get really fascinating. Ray believes that all this increased solar activity is basically turning up the volume on our emotions, making us more sensitive to energy and speeding up our spiritual growth. It's like the sun is shining a spotlight on everything in our lives that's not working anymore, pushing us to face our shadows and become our true selves.
So all those crazy, intense emotions I've been feeling lately, the sudden anger, the random sadness, even those moments of pure joy, could that all be because of what the sun is doing?
It's definitely a possibility, and it's not always a bad thing. Ray says that those super strong emotions are actually a sign that we're waking up, becoming more aware of who we really are and getting rid of those old patterns that are holding us back.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like we're cleaning house, both emotionally and spiritually, so we can make room for something new and better.
Exactly. And that's where things like mindfulness meditation and energy work can be really helpful. They can help us deal with those intense emotions, stay grounded, and go through these changes more smoothly.
So it's not just about letting the cosmic energy wash over us. We need to be actively working with it and using it to grow as people.
Exactly. Ray believes that as more and more people wake up and step into their full potential, it's going to create this ripple effect, leading to a more conscious, compassionate, and connected world.
I love that vision. It's so inspiring to think that we can actually be part of shaping the future, not just by changing the world out there, but by changing ourselves from within.
Absolutely. And Ray's book, The Tide Has Turned, has some really insightful stuff about how to do that. He talks about connecting with your intuition, setting clear intentions, and aligning your energy with your highest purpose.
Sounds like a really empowering book, something that can help people not just understand these crazy cosmic shifts, but actually learn how to navigate them in a way that feels good and meaningful.
Totally. And I think that's the key takeaway here. We're not just puppets of the universe. We can actually learn how to work with these cosmic forces, harness their energy, and create a better future for ourselves and for everyone.
This whole deep dive has been absolutely incredible. I feel like I have a completely new understanding of the sun, myself, and the world.
Me too. It's pretty amazing to think that something as simple as sunlight could have such a powerful effect on our lives and how we evolve.
I think it's safe to say we'll never look at the sun the same way again. To everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to explore some of these ideas too. If you're feeling drawn to Paul Ray's work, you can find his book, The Tide Has Turned, on the Aligned Harmony website. We'll put a link in the show notes too.